What's happening, everybody? Welcome into a brand new edition of the Pack a Day podcast here on YouTube. Can you feel it? You can feel the off season. It's right at the precipice. You can start feeling it really bubble up. We're starting to see more and more releases. We're starting to see more activity throughout the league. We just had, of course, the franchise tag spree that happened a couple days ago, and we're starting to pick up momentum. And as we kind of jump in here further, I think day by day, it's just going to be kind of like a runaway freight train over the course of the next couple weeks. Make sure you have your Twitter alerts turned on because it is going to come like a Joe Barry defense, fast and furious over the course of the next couple weeks. And again, you can feel everything start to bubble up. And of course, that's even going to become much more the case now that the NFL has announced and teams are aware of what the actual salary cap is going to be. That's been one of the real key things that was announced, and it came in officially at $182.5 million. So let's start there and what that means for Green Bay. So ultimately, it doesn't mean a ton, right? So we knew that the floor was going to be about 180 or was 180 million, that they weren't going to go below 180 million for this season. So we've known that for some time. There's been whispers and rumors here and there that maybe it would get up to 185 million, maybe even as high as about 189 to 190 million. But ultimately, I think teams were probably preparing that it was going to come in somewhere around 185 million, give or take, right? I think that's probably what they were planning for. And I think most teams, and if I know the Packers at all, and I like to pretend that I do, I think the Packers were probably hedging their bets that it was going to come in lower. And if they get a windfall more money to spend, so be it. But you know that Brian Gutekunst, Russ Ball, and this Packers organization were prepared for the worst. And if they got better news, so be it. But 182.5 million is obviously not a great number for Green Bay. Now, the difference again between 182.5 million and about 185 million is fairly minimal, but this is one of those off seasons that for Green Bay, as you're trying to take that step to the next level, like every million has a little bit more emphasis, right? Extra 2.5 million, that's Mercedes Lewis, right? He's basically signed to about 2.3 million every season for the past few seasons. So that's a Mercedes Lewis contract. Or let's just say that the Packers were, willing to go at $9 million for Aaron Jones, right? And they said, well, what if, this isn't the case, but they all of a sudden had an additional 2.5. Like that's potentially, and I don't think this is the case, but potentially the difference between, say, a $9 million offer for Aaron Jones and an $11.5 million for Aaron Jones offer for Aaron Jones. So maybe that's the difference there, right? So I don't think that's the case with Aaron Jones. I think they had made up their mind with what they were going to do with him regardless. But the point being is that extra $2.5 million can make a difference in some capacity for a team like Green Bay, who's tight up against the cap, is competing to try to get to a Super Bowl, and every little bit extra can help. Now, can you borrow that 2.5 million and beyond from future caps and try to, save more money this year so you have more money to spend, or gain more money this year so you have more money to spend? Absolutely. Those are all definitely things that are on the table for Brian Gutekunst, Russ Ball, and this Packers front office. But every little bit would have helped. And coming in at 182.5 million, definitely not a great number for the Green Bay Packers. So as I've mentioned all along this offseason, Russ Ball and the Packers still have a lot of work to do, and they're going to have some major decisions to make on a Preston Smith, on a Dean Lowry. Do they want to mess with the contract for Aaron Rodgers, or do they want to just keep it as is? Are they going to maybe making a change or in addition to the years for Zadarius Smith or Adrian Amos? All of those things are on the table. Same thing for an extension for Devontae Adams. A plethora of ways that they can go about doing this. But over the course of this next week, we are going to get a major glimpse into just how much Green Bay's willing to risk this season, how much money they're going to have to spend, and what moves ultimately they make to clear up some of that space. And what I mean here is if they, find some small restructure for Preston Smith and then extend Devontae Adams and Zadarius Smith, and that's it, you're probably looking at maybe one small to mid-tier free agent that they can get. And them not restructuring Aaron Rodgers and clearing up more space in that situation, or maybe cutting a Preston Smith and a Dean Lowry, exhausting all of those avenues to get space this season, that will be very telling that they're not making some sort of all-in approach and they're just kind of keeping status quo. They're going to try to keep the current team together, probably sans Corey Linsley and Aaron Jones, with some, maybe a mid-tier free agent and 10 draft picks now coming into Green Bay, trying to make up, for what you're losing in Corey Linsley and Aaron Jones. So, and not to mention as well some of the younger players who are you're hoping are going to take a step this season. So we're going to know a lot more about the Packers in this next week as they go through all of these decisions. And it has to happen within the next week because the league year starts a week from now, and they have to get under the cap prior to that point. It's not to say that if they do the bare minimum to get under the cap at the start of free agency that they can't clear more space later. That's certainly the case. Maybe they just do one deal right now. There's maybe a way that with a Za'Darius or an Adams or a Rodgers deal individually, that just that in and of itself, depending on how they do it, could get Green Bay like right below that minimum threshold. And then if they want to make moves after that, they could just kind of do them, one at a time as needed. But I think it's still going to be very, very telling just how Green Bay navigates this next week to try to get under the cap and just how much under the cap do they get. So I'll definitely keep you posted very much, and I'll be very in tune with those decisions and how they're going to affect the cap. So make sure to keep it here every day if you're not already. If you are, I greatly appreciate you. And then, the other big piece of news from Wednesday, of course, was the compensatory pick. So they were officially announced. In fact, they kind of got released, and then actually Green Bay got a bump up with each of their picks one spot, which was nice to see. But Green Bay ultimately ended up with a 4th, a 5th, and a 6th round compensatory selection. The 142nd pick, the 177th, and the 219th overall pick in this year's draft. So that ultimately leaves Green Bay with 10 selections in this draft: a 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 2 4ths, 2 5ths, 2 6ths, and a very late 7th round pick. So that's what Green Bay will be able to use. And I think this is going to be really interesting to see how Brian Gutekunst utilizes those picks. So on one hand, right now, the roster's only at 61 players out of a potential 90. And let's just say Green Bay makes a couple, releases. They're probably going to add in, a couple restricted free agents, a couple of their, exclusive rights, probably a good majority of their exclusive rights free agents, if not all of them. Maybe that gets to, let's say 68, maybe even 70 when all of those deals are done, but maybe somewhere around 68. Let's just play that out. So they're at about 68 roster spots. That still means that they've got 22 roster spots that they need to fill. Now, with 10 draft picks, maybe a free agent signing or two, and then 10 undrafted free agents, that's certainly a way that you could go. But Green Bay definitely needs, cheap talent to kind of fill out the back end of their roster and not add more money to the cap. So using those 10 selections could make some sense. At the same token, I'm not so sure that this is a team that needs 10 rookies on their 53-man roster. So if you're making 10 selections plus adding another class of undrafted free agents where usually you have 1 or 2 guys from that group make the roster each year, I'm just not sure there's room for 11, 12 rookies. So I think what this ultimately does is it gives Green Bay some ammunition to potentially try to move up in the 2nd or 3rd round, maybe even in the 1st round. There's a really good chance that, let's say it takes their 3rd round pick to move up in the 1st round to get a guy that they really like, that they could package maybe a couple, their 2 4th round picks now to get up to the, maybe the top of the 4th round and still get one of their top 100 players that's on their board. And then you could leave with potentially maybe one of the guys that was in your top 20 on your draft board, still sticking with your 2nd round pick, who is probably in your top 50 with where they're selecting, and then moving up their 2 4th round picks to get a guy that was potentially in their top 100. If they get 3 guys that are in the top 100, 2 in the top 50, and 1 in their top 20, I think Green Bay would be really ecstatic with how things fell to them. So this definitely gives Brian Gutekunst some additional ammunition. And as we've seen through his first few seasons as a general manager, he has not hesitated to use draft picks to move up as needed. So expect this to give him a lot of flexibility to move up and down the draft board as he is willing and really wanting to do year in and year out. So I think that's kind of the big takeaway from the comp picks today. And then last but not least, Ben Albright had mentioned with the release of Emmanuel Sanders, who was released on Wednesday by the New Orleans Saints, that he wouldn't be surprised if Green Bay ended up with Emmanuel Sanders on a team-friendly deal, something to that extent. I'm paraphrasing a bit, but that was kind of his tweet. Now, Ben is very, very connected and has sources within the league. I didn't read this as something that, he heard from a source that Emmanuel Sanders is going to end up in Green Bay or anything like that. But I also wouldn't necessarily completely ignore it because Ben is very connected and he will break news like this from time to time. So the fact that he even brought that up was intriguing. And let's not forget, just back in 2020, Green Bay made a 3-year offer to Emmanuel Sanders, which he decided against and decided to sign a 2-year deal with the New Orleans Saints instead. And didn't exactly work out the best for him. Green Bay had the better season, beat New Orleans in the regular season, went further in the playoffs, and Emmanuel Sanders got cut after a year. So that's what you get for not choosing Green Bay, Emmanuel. But maybe you'll learn your lesson this time around. But one of the reasons he stated for making that decision is because he didn't want to play in the cold. So that could still be a very big factor here, and just not wanting to live in Green Bay because of the cold was more like it. I don't necessarily know that he hated playing in the cold, but I think it was more living in the cold and liking the South a little bit more, which I get. But it was at least noteworthy nonetheless. As far as what Emmanuel Sanders would bring to this team, Pro Football Focus gave him a really nice grade again this past season. He's been one of their most consistently graded players through the course of the last decade. He will be 34 years old this next season. So he is not exactly a spring chicken and is definitely getting up there in age, but he's continuing to play at a high level. And this is a player that usually wins with route running and just kind of his uniqueness within his route. So it's not necessarily something where his speed falls off and all of a sudden he can't get open. He is definitely known for winning within his routes. So you don't expect a huge decline. At the same token, when you get to 34, your run after the catch starts to go, your body starts to break down a little bit more. So if this were to be a deal that Green Bay would look to make, it would have to be on a team-friendly deal. And even then, I know Green Bay just showed interest in him on a 3-year contract last season, but I just think based on where Green Bay's wide receiver group is right now, I don't see this as a priority for Green Bay, bringing him in, unless it's maybe towards the end of training camp and maybe somebody gets hurt. But if you've got Davante Adams, Allen Lazard, MVS, and Devin Funchess as your top 4, maybe EQ is a guy that's competing for a spot, Malik Taylor, you have kind of your core group of receivers set in a way. And what I mean by that is, you're definitely looking for talent. And if you can acquire a top receiver for via the draft, or even in free agency, if a top receiver presented itself, you're not letting Allen Lazard and Devin Funchess and MVS get in the way of adding that wide receiver, right? But the difference at this point in their careers between a Emmanuel Sanders and say an MVS or an Allen Lazard or a Devin Funchess, I'm just not sure it's that great. I'm just not sure it moves the needle that much. And here's the bigger thing. Funchess and Lazard and MVS and Davante Adams, all 4 of them, do not play special teams. Emmanuel Sanders does not play special teams. You can't really fill out a roster of 5 receivers that are going to be active on game day that are all not going to play special teams. And Lazard could play in a pinch, but he's kind of worked his way out of that rotation. And of course, if you draft a rookie or bring a couple younger guys in, but you're not probably keeping 7 receivers. And then even if you did keep like a 6 receiver, then you're activating them. You've basically got to, make one of these guys inactive just because you need somebody to play special teams. So it's not a great situation. And those special teams decisions always have to be in the back of your mind as you're looking at how you're going to fill out this roster. Now, it's very possible that if Green Bay did bring in, Emmanuel Sanders on a team-friendly deal without much guaranteed money, that you could just have Devin Funchess and Emmanuel Sanders compete for one spot. You could say, we're going to bring back Lazard, MVS, Adams. We're going to go with either Devin Funchess or Emmanuel Sanders as that 4th receiver. Maybe EQ and Malik Taylor and the rest of the receivers on the roster fight for one spot, and then maybe you draft someone in the 2nd or 3rd round that gets that other spot. That's certainly a path that you could go with, and sometimes just injuries will work their way out as well. But just where things are at right now and what Green Bay has on the roster and how it kind of, fills itself out from a special team standpoint, I don't see this as being a deal that Green Bay is going to actively pursue. If it's if it's a vet minimum deal and there's no guaranteed, absolutely sign him tomorrow. There's no downside in that because you can release him at the end of camp for no cost. But I think Sanders will go more than that on the open market. And I think ultimately some team finds more value in Sanders than what Green Bay would have for bringing him in for the time being. That is going to do it for me today. As I mentioned, things are starting to come in fast and furious, so we should have some really exciting episodes coming up. Make sure to subscribe if you've not already. Make sure to check out today's audio podcast featuring Maggie Loney as well as Jacob Westendorf. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.